you move?
Officer, what is the problem? I'm simply putting my groceries
I
in
said
my
hands
car.
up! We got a call about a woman matching your description breaking into luxury vehicles.
I don't
You fit
care
the profile
if you
perfectly.
are making a grave mistake. I am a judge, and this is my...
Ma'am, can you explain what you're doing in this vehicle? Hands where I can see them, now. I'm loading case files into my car, officer. There's no need for that tone. Officer, it's sir to you. Now step out of the car. ID, you don't look like you belong here. This is the audio-visual record of an incident that occurred on April 14, 2023, in the parking garage of the Sterling Tower, Chicago. The footage, captured by Officer Rick Jennings' body-worn camera and the building's closed-circuit television, documents the stop and subsequent unlawful arrest of U.S. Federal Judge Dr. Evelyn Reed, a 12-minute procedural failure motivated by racial bias that resulted in a lawsuit costing the city $4,800,000 and the end of an 18-year career in law enforcement. Before the incident, the scene was one of absolute normalcy, a portrait of quiet weekend preparation. The date was April 14, 2023, and the time was 5:42 p.m. The setting was the P2 level of the private residential parking garage beneath the Sterling Tower, a high-security luxury high-rise in the heart of Chicago. The air was cool and still, thick with the faint, sterile scent of concrete dust and the low, almost subliminal hum of the building's ventilation system. The only sounds were the soft scuff of rubber-soled shoes on the sealed floor and the rhythmic thud of heavy cardboard boxes being carefully placed into the trunk of a pristine, deep blue Audi Q5. The woman performing this mundane task was Dr. Evelyn Reed, 45, a United States federal judge for the Northern District of Illinois. Dressed not in the imposing black robes of her profession, but in simple gray athletic leggings and a comfortable sweatshirt, she was indistinguishable from any other resident engaged in a weekend chore. Her movements were efficient and methodical, each box lifted and stacked with an economy of motion that spoke to a mind accustomed to order and precision. These were not moving boxes, they were banker's boxes, each meticulously labeled with case numbers and dates, containing declassified documents and legal research for her upcoming week on the bench. This was her routine, a weekly ritual of transporting work between her federal chambers and her secure home office, a testament to a work ethic that had made her one of the most respected and youngest jurists ever appointed to the federal judiciary. Her expertise was in the labyrinthine world of financial crimes, a domain of numbers, statutes, and complex schemes, where her intellect was a scalpel, dissecting fraud and corporate malfeasance with surgical precision. On this Friday evening, however, she was simply a resident, on her day off, in the secure confines of her own building. The garage itself was a controlled environment. Entry required a resident's key fob, and the entire level was monitored by a network of high-definition CCTV cameras, their small black domes mounted on the concrete ceiling beams, like silent, unblinking eyes. The fluorescent lights above cast a flat, even glow, eliminating shadows and leaving no corner unobserved. It was, by any objective measure, one of the safest and most secure locations in the city. But this objective reality was about to be shattered by a subjective and baseless perception. At 5:38 p.m., 4 minutes before the confrontation, an anonymous 911 call was placed. The caller, whose identity was never confirmed, reported suspicious activity involving a black woman tampering with a luxury car. This single, racially charged phrase was all it took to weaponize a system designed to protect. Responding to the dispatch was Officer Rick Jennings, 48, an 18-year veteran of the force. His service record, a document later scrutinized in excruciating detail, was a study in mediocrity punctuated by moments of aggression. It contained no commendations for bravery or exceptional police work, but it did feature 14 separate misconduct complaints filed by citizens over the preceding decade. Allegations ranged from excessive force to verbal abuse and unlawful searches. In every single case, the complaints were dismissed, citing a lack of sufficient evidence, a common outcome when an officer's word is pitted against a civilian without irrefutable proof. Jennings arrived on the scene not as an impartial investigator, but as an enforcer primed by confirmation bias. The dispatcher's words had painted a picture in his mind, and he was now seeking to validate it. His patrol car entered the garage too quickly, its tires chirping on the slick concrete, an aggressive sound that echoed in the enclosed space. He parked haphazardly, blocking a lane. He emerged from his vehicle with a rigid posture, his hand already resting on his holstered weapon. He ignored the obvious signs of normalcy, the professional-grade file boxes, the woman's calm demeanor, the sheer absurdity of a car theft taking place in a high-security garage with a single, unlocked vehicle. He saw only what the call had told him to see. He activated his body-worn camera, a device mandated by department policy for transparency and accountability, and in doing so, he began recording the precise, unassailable evidence of his own career-ending implosion.
The body cam footage, later analyzed frame by frame by use of force experts, showed his hand never strayed more than an inch from his holstered sidearm. His shoulders were squared, his chin was down, a posture designed to intimidate. He stopped 6 feet from her, a calculated distance that was both confrontational and tactically unsound. He did not introduce himself. He did not state the reason for the stop. He opened with an accusation disguised as a question. "Ma'am, can you explain what you're doing in this vehicle? Hands where I can see them. Now." The words were clipped, the command absolute. Dr. Reed, who had been placing the final box into her trunk, did not flinch. She slowly straightened up, turning to face him not with the alarm of a criminal caught in the act, but with the mild, analytical curiosity of someone observing an unexpected phenomenon. Her hands, empty and relaxed, were already in plain sight. She met his gaze directly. "I'm loading case files into my car, officer. There is no need for that tone." Her voice, recorded with crystal clarity by the microphone on his chest, was steady and devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact, a correction offered not as a challenge, but as information. This calm, rational response was a variable Jennings had not anticipated, and it acted as an accelerant on his simmering prejudice. His protocol dictated de-escalation. His pride demanded domination. "Officer, it's sir to you. Now step out of the car. ID. You don't look like you belong here." The final sentence hung in the sterile air of the garage, an irrefutable artifact of bias. The statement was a legal and logical fallacy. In a private residential garage, belonging is established by tenancy, not by an officer's subjective assessment of appearance. The building's own high-definition CCTV camera, mounted on a beam directly overhead, provided a stark, wide-angle rebuttal to his claim, showing a resident calmly loading boxes into a car parked in a designated spot. Dr. Reed's expression remained impassive, but her mind was already documenting his errors. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course. My identification is in my purse on the passenger seat. If you will allow me a moment, I will gladly retrieve it for you." She made a slight preparatory movement toward the driver's side door, a gesture of compliance. It was a textbook response, a clear signal of non-threatening cooperation. But Jennings did not see cooperation. He saw a suspect attempting to control the scene, to dictate the terms of engagement. He saw her composure as arrogance, and he was determined to shatter it. He moved instantly to intercept her, his body physically blocking her path to the vehicle door. The body cam lens jerked as he shifted, capturing a close-up of the Audi's polished blue paint, then swinging back to frame Dr. Reed. "Stay right where you are." His voice was a low growl. "Don't move. I don't want you reaching for anything." He had now created a perfect procedural trap, a paradox of his own making. He had demanded identification, and in the same breath, he had made it physically impossible for her to comply. This tactic, often used to justify further escalation, was a fatal miscalculation. He was not dealing with a frightened civilian. He was dealing with a federal jurist whose entire career was built upon the deconstruction of flawed logic. Dr. Reed stopped, her hands held slightly away from her body in a gesture of transparent compliance. Her gaze did not waver from his. "Officer," she began, her tone still meticulously neutral, "you have requested my identification. I have informed you of its location and have confirmed my willingness to provide it. You are now physically preventing me from complying with your direct order." Her words were precise, each one chosen to build a record. She was not arguing, she was clarifying the sequence of events for the unblinking electronic eye on his chest. "Please, advise me on how you wish for me to proceed." The question was not a plea for guidance, but a masterful legal maneuver. It shifted the burden of logic back onto him, forcing him to either acknowledge his contradictory commands or escalate his aggression without cause. The body cam footage shows a muscle twitching in Jennings' jaw. He was being intellectually cornered, and his only recourse was to pivot to a new line of attack, abandoning the issue of identification entirely. "I asked the questions here," he snapped. "What's in these boxes?" The question was accusatory, implying contraband. "Legal documents," she replied without hesitation. "Are there any weapons in the vehicle?" "No." "Are you the registered owner of this Audi?" "Yes, I am. The vehicle is registered to my name at my address in this building." Each answer was a calm, factual torpedo that struck the hull of his manufactured suspicion.
He had no legitimate reason to continue the detention, yet to retreat now would be an admission of error, a blow to his ego he was unwilling to sustain. He looked at her, standing there in her simple athletic wear, her composure an impenetrable shield. He saw her refusal to be intimidated not as the confidence of an innocent citizen aware of her rights, but as the defiant arrogance of a criminal mastermind. It was this profound, racially fueled misreading of character that sealed his next action. He made the decision that if he could not break her with his authority, he would do it with force.
What would you have done in Judge Reed's position? Would you have maintained her level of calm, or would your anger have taken over? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The question hung in the air, a perfect, logical trap that left him no room to maneuver. For a full 3 seconds, Officer Jennings was silent. The body cam footage shows him motionless, his jaw muscles working beneath his skin. He had been presented with an irrefutable contradiction of his own making, and the woman before him had done so without a trace of the fear or anger he expected. She had not raised her voice, had not made a single threatening gesture. She had simply used his own words, his own commands, to expose the illogic of his actions. This intellectual defeat, delivered so calmly and publicly, was more than his pride could endure. His internal calculus, fueled by 18 years of unexamined authority and a deep-seated prejudice that saw her composure as insolence, arrived at a single catastrophic conclusion. If he could not win the argument, he would end it with the absolute power vested in his uniform. The moment for investigation was over. The moment for fabrication had begun. At precisely 5:51 p.m., 9 minutes after initiating the stop, he made the decision that would unravel his life. "I've had enough of your games," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing pitch. "You're being evasive. You're uncooperative." The accusations were baseless, directly contradicted by the impartial digital records being created. The overhead CCTV, camera 04B, showed her standing perfectly still, her hands visible, her posture non-threatening. His own body cam audio had recorded her every offer to comply. But he was no longer operating in the realm of fact. He was creating his own reality, one in which he was the beleaguered hero and she was the obstinate suspect. He reached for his radio with one hand, while his other moved to unclip his handcuffs. "For your safety and mine, you are being detained," he announced, the words a hollow recitation of protocol. "The charge is disorderly conduct and resisting arrest." The statement was a legal fiction. There had been no disorder until he created it. There had been no resistance, only a calm request for logical consistency. He had manufactured a crime to justify an action he was already determined to take. Dr. Reed's expression did not change, but her focus sharpened. She was no longer a resident being harassed. She was a federal judge witnessing the commission of a crime. Her response was not a plea, but a legal pronouncement. "Officer," her voice was a clear, steady instrument of fact. "You have no legal basis for this action. You are committing a federal crime, deprivation of rights under color of law, Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. I strongly advise you to reconsider your next move." It was a final professional courtesy, a last chance to de-escalate. She had handed him an exit, citing the specific statute that every sworn officer is trained to fear, a law designed to police the police themselves. It was a warning that he was crossing a line from a departmental violation into a federal felony. Jennings heard the words, but he did not process their meaning. He heard only a challenge, a threat wrapped in legal jargon from a woman he had already judged unworthy of the car she stood beside. He emitted a short, sharp sound, a scoff of derision captured in high fidelity. He dropped his radio and drew his handcuffs, the steel links glinting under the fluorescent lights. The metallic click as he swung the first cuff into place around her wrist was brutally loud in the quiet garage. It was the sound of a career ending, the point of no return. He grabbed her arm with unnecessary force and spun her around, pushing her forward against the cold, polished surface of her own Audi. The body cam lurched, capturing a disorienting view of the car's deep blue paint, then the back of her gray sweatshirt. The overhead camera documented the scene with damning clarity. A 220-pound officer using his body weight to pin a compliant, unresisting woman against her vehicle. She did not struggle. She absorbed the impact with a stillness that was its own form of resistance, her hands now behind her back, ready for the second cuff. He had placed her exactly where he felt she belonged, subdued, controlled, and under his power. The irony was absolute. The very symbol of her success that had triggered his suspicion was now being used as an instrument in her unlawful arrest. The call had been made, the cuffs were on, and every single frame of his crime was being permanently etched into digital memory.
The short walk from the Audi to the patrol car was a silent procession of misplaced authority. The only sounds were the soft scrape of their shoes on the concrete and the rhythmic, metallic clinking of the handcuffs, a percussive beat marking the seconds of Officer Jennings' escalating liability. His grip on Dr. Reed's upper arm was firm, proprietary, a physical assertion of a victory he believed he had won. He was leading a subdued suspect, a narrative that existed only in his mind. But Dr. Reed was not a suspect. She was a judicial officer executing the final stage of a security protocol designed for this exact type of illegal detention.
She waited until they were positioned in the open, equidistant from her vehicle and his, a location perfectly framed by the unblinking eye of the overhead CCTV camera. Then, she spoke. Her voice, captured with perfect fidelity by the microphone on his chest, was not raised in anger or fear. It was transformed into an instrument of legal declaration, imbued with the full weight of the federal judiciary. For the record, my name is Evelyn Reed. I am a United States federal judge for the Northern District of Illinois. The statement landed in the sterile air of the garage with the force of a physical blow. The body cam footage shows Jennings stopping mid-stride, his entire body going rigid. The overhead camera provides a wider, more damning view, his shoulders tense, his head snapping slightly to the side, as if to better hear her. For a full 2 seconds, he is frozen, a statue of disbelief. Dr. Reed continued, her tone unwavering, each word a precisely placed stone, building the foundation of his ruin. Under federal statute, I cannot be arrested except by order of a higher court or for a felony committed in your presence. You are in direct violation of federal law. Your name and badge number have been recorded. The flicker of comprehension in his eyes is visible even in the grainy body cam video. It is the primal fear of every law enforcement officer, the realization that they have crossed a line from which there is no return. His professional training, buried deep beneath layers of ego and prejudice, was screaming at him. The name, the title, the calm citation of federal code, it all pointed to an unimaginable, catastrophic error. But to accept it now would be to admit his own bigotry, his own foolishness. The humiliation would be absolute. His pride, the very thing that had led him to this precipice, refused to let him step back. He made a choice. He chose ignorance. A short, derisive laugh escaped his lips, a hollow sound that betrayed the panic beneath. "You're a judge? Yeah, right." He tightened his grip on her arm, the action a desperate reassertion of control. "That's a new one. Trying to intimidate an officer of the law, lady? That's another charge for you." He had now invented a new crime to cover the old one. He pulled her the final few feet to his patrol car, opened the rear door with a rough jerk, and guided her into the back seat. The plastic was hard and unyielding. As he closed the door, the camera caught a final glimpse of her face through the window. Her expression was unchanged, a mask of calm observation. He had imprisoned a federal judge, but in her eyes, he was already the one on trial. He turned his back on the car, his face set in a mask of false confidence, completely oblivious that the radio call he was about to make would not be a report of an arrest, but a summons for his own judgment. The radio call was Jennings' final act of self-sabotage, a broadcast of his own fabricated reality. "Dispatch, this is Unit 734. I have one in custody at the Sterling Tower parking garage, P2 level. Suspect is an adult female, code 415, disorderly conduct, 148 PC, resisting, and add 182, attempting to intimidate an officer." The words were a practiced, casual recitation of charges he had invented moments before. The dispatcher's voice, tinny and distant, confirmed the transmission, logging the false report into the official record. The 6 minutes that followed were an eternity of false calm. Jennings stood by his vehicle, a sentinel guarding a prisoner who, in reality, silently presiding over his indictment. The fluorescent lights hummed, their low buzz the only sound in the concrete tomb he had created for his career. The only movement was the slow, sweeping pan of the CCTV camera overhead, diligently documenting his every career-ending action. Then, the sound of approaching tires broke the silence. A second patrol car, followed by a supervisor's SUV, entered the garage, their headlights cutting through the dimness. They parked in a precise, professional formation that made Jennings' own haphazard placement look amateurish. Sergeant David Miller, a 25-year veteran with a wary but sharp face, emerged from the SUV. His body cam, activated as per protocol, began recording the scene from a fresh, damning perspective. With him was Officer Chen, a younger, more cautious officer whose expression was one of neutral readiness. Miller's initial approach was routine,
his face a mask of mild annoyance at a weekend call-out that was interrupting his paperwork. "Jennings, what's all this? Dispatch said you had a suspect claiming to be a federal official." Miller's tone was skeptical, as if expecting to find a routine disturbance with a delusional individual, a story he had heard 100 times. Jennings puffed out his chest slightly, ready to present his version of events, the hero of his own fiction. "Right here, Sarge. Got her in the back. Caused a whole scene, refused to identify herself, then tried to pull the whole 'I'm a judge' routine on me." He gestured toward the patrol car with a thumb, the picture of misplaced confidence. Sergeant Miller nodded curtly, his gaze moving past Jennings to the rear window of the squad car. He took 3 steps closer, peering through the glass to get a clear look at the detained women. The footage from his own body cam captures the exact moment his world tilted on its axis. His face, previously set in lines of weary authority, went slack.
The color drained from it, leaving behind a waxy, pale sheen. His eyes widened, not in surprise, but in a state of pure, unadulterated terror. The audio from his microphone picked up a sharp intake of breath, a gasp of professional horror. He stumbled back a step, his hand flying up to his radio as if by instinct, before dropping it uselessly to his side. "Jennings, for the love of God, what have you done?" His voice was a strangled whisper, a choked sound of disbelief and panic. He turned on Jennings, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Uncuff Judge Reed right now. That's the federal judge." The words hung in the air, a verdict delivered not in a courtroom, but on the cold concrete of a parking garage. Officer Jennings' smug posture dissolved instantly. The body cam footage, his own, provides an unflinching close-up of his collapse. His jaw dropped, his eyes darted from his furious sergeant to the impassive face of Dr. Reed in the back of his car, and for a moment, he seemed to shrink inside his uniform. The entire foundation of his reality, built on a bedrock of prejudice and unearned authority, had been pulverized by a single terrifying sentence. He was no longer a cop making an arrest. He was a defendant at his own sentencing, and his judge was sitting in the back of his own patrol car. Sergeant Miller did not wait for Jennings to process the magnitude of his error. He moved with a desperate urgency, shoving the paralyzed officer aside as he fumbled for the rear door handle. "Open this door, Chen, now!" he barked at the younger officer, who was already scrambling to comply. The door swung open, and Miller immediately adopted a posture of profound deference. He knelt slightly, bringing his eye level down to meet Dr. Reed's, a gesture of supplication. "Judge Reed, ma'am, I am Sergeant Miller. On behalf of the entire department, I am so sorry. There are no words." His voice was thick with a mixture of apology and raw fear. He was not just speaking to a wrongfully arrested citizen. He was speaking to a pillar of the federal legal system, a woman whose signature could authorize investigations into his own department, a woman who held the power to dismantle careers with a single ruling. Dr. Reed's expression remained neutral, but she gave a single, slow nod of acknowledgement. The gesture was not one of forgiveness, but of command. She held out her cuffed wrists, the steel glinting under the harsh lights. Miller turned to Jennings, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "Your keys. Now." Jennings, moving like a man in a trance, fumbled at his belt, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unclip the handcuff key. He held it out, and Miller snatched it from his trembling fingers. The sergeant's movements were deliberate and careful as he unlocked the steel cuffs from Dr. Reed's wrists. The metallic clicks echoed in the garage, each one a nail in the coffin of Jennings' Zarir. The sound of the handcuffs being removed was not just the end of an unlawful arrest, it was the first official act in the complete dismantling of Officer Rick Jennings' life, a process that would be as methodical and unforgiving as the law he had so arrogantly violated. The aftermath was not a storm, but a quiet, methodical dismantling. The click of the handcuffs unlocking was the starting gun for a process of administrative, financial, and personal ruin that was as swift as it was absolute. On the cold concrete of the parking garage, under the unblinking gaze of the CCTV camera that had served as the primary witness for the prosecution, Rick Jennings' 18-year career was summarily executed. Sergeant Miller, his face a mask of controlled fury, did not allow Jennings another moment of perceived authority. Before Dr. Reed had even fully straightened her back, Miller ordered Officer Chen to escort Jennings to the supervisor's SUV, where he was instructed to sit and wait. He was now the one being detained. Miller then personally escorted Judge Reed back to her vehicle, his apologies constant and deferential.
Within the hour, the precinct captain and a deputy chief were on site, their presence a testament to the seismic shockwave this incident had sent through the department's command structure. Jennings was stripped of his badge and service weapon on the spot, an act of profound humiliation performed in the very location of his transgression. The internal affairs investigation that followed was a mere formality, a procedural autopsy on a career that was already dead. The evidence was irrefutable and overwhelming. The synchronized video feeds from Jennings' own body cam and the building security system provided a 360-degree, minute-by-minute account of his catastrophic failure in judgment. There were no gray areas to exploit, no procedural loopholes to hide in. His actions, his words, his motivations were laid bare for the review board to see. He was terminated for cause, a decision that was both unanimous and immediate. The official citation listed gross misconduct, dereliction of duty, and a direct violation of civil rights. This specific designation, termination for cause, triggered the most devastating financial consequence, the immediate and total forfeiture of his pension and benefits. The $1.5 million he had accumulated over nearly 2 decades of service vanished.
His monthly salary of $8,750 ceased, and his professional law enforcement certification was permanently revoked, rendering him unemployable in any security capacity, from a small-town sheriff to a mall security guard. The civil consequences were even more staggering. To avoid a public trial that would have been a national embarrassment, the City of Chicago's legal department moved quickly to settle. Dr. Reed's legal team, working pro bono out of respect for her position, presented a non-negotiable figure. The final settlement, paid by the city's taxpayers, was exactly $4,800,000. The sum was a cold, hard quantification of Jennings's prejudice. Of that amount, $1.8 million was allocated for punitive damages and legal fees. The remaining $3 million, a sum that would have been a life-altering windfall for anyone, was, at Judge Reed's explicit direction, transferred in its entirety to the Illinois Justice Project, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal defense for those who, unlike her, did not have the power and position to defend themselves against such abuses. Her victory was not for personal gain. It was to fortify the very system Jennings had sought to undermine. But the accounting was not yet complete. The Department of Justice, acting on a formal complaint filed from Judge Reed's chambers, pursued federal criminal charges. Rick Jennings was indicted under Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code for the deprivation of rights under color of law. He pleaded guilty to avoid a prison sentence, but his conviction as a felon was permanent. The sentence included 5 years of probation, 2,000 hours of mandatory community service, and a lifetime ban from possessing a firearm. The man who had built his identity on a gun and a badge was now legally barred from ever touching one again. His life became a quiet portrait of karmic retribution. He was last seen cleaning graffiti off public park benches, his face unrecognized by the passers-by he had once sworn to protect. Meanwhile, 2 weeks after the incident, Judge Evelyn Reed presided over one of the most complex financial fraud cases in the state's history, her focus absolute, her authority unquestioned. The incident in the garage was a closed file, a footnote in a distinguished career, while for the man who had accosted her, it was the final chapter. Was his ruin simply the result of one bad day, one poor decision? Or was it the inevitable bill coming due for a debt of prejudice that had been accumulating, unchecked, for 18 long years?